Hello and welcome to Access to HE, the Managing Human Resources for Business unit. And we're looking at week 4, performance management. Right, the two objectives that we're looking at this week are 5.1, discuss contemporary views on best practice in performance management. And 5.2, explain the main stages in the performance review process and documentation required. Okay, so we're actually going to look at contemporary views. These are modern views. These are the views that are being looked at and used now. Okay, I've got a little graphic here that shows you some traditional views versus the modern methods. You'll be asked to talk about contemporary views in your assignment. So please don't waste time writing about the traditional methods. We only want you to talk about the contemporary views, the views that are being looked at the moment. Okay, so you don't need to spend a whole paragraph writing about the traditional methods. You could sort of say, this is a change from so and so, but just keep it short. You don't need to spend a lot of detail on traditional methods. So, contemporary best practices in performance has really got a much bigger emphasis on continuous feedback, employee development, and really aligning performance with the organizational goals. And one of the biggest issues about it, it's moving away from annual reviews, which used to happen, on a particular day at a certain time, everybody had an annual review. And it's looking at a much more dynamic approach. So I'm going to break down some of the key contemporary views over the next few slides. Okay, the first one really is shifting from annual reviews to continuous feedback. Why would we do it? Well, annual reviews are actually seen as quite a reactive process. It's like you tend to do it at the end of the year and you look back as to how the year's gone. And it feels like a sort of one-off snapshot, really, more than anything. So it doesn't sort of link up to the future that well. It doesn't look at a continuous process. So it's not something people are used to and ongoing. They tend to go, oh God, it's annual review time, and then everyone tends to get through it as quickly as possible, my experience, because the manager's got 10 annual reviews to do at the same time, or 20, depending on how big the team is. Um, and then everyone sort of compares notes afterwards. Continuous feedback, which is regular and ongoing, means that in that review, you don't have something that you haven't heard about for a year. It's about, sometimes you might write up an annual review, and some companies still have an annual review, but because of the work you've been putting in through the year, the annual review is quite short and sweet, and it just sort of formulates things to give you a sort of a jumping off spot for next year, really. There is a role for technology. There's a lot of digital tools now and platforms that allow you to actually implement continuous feedback systems that don't take so long, so that people can just, like whenever they have a little feedback session, they can document it, which means that if a manager wants to go and sort of have a think about, if they're going to meet up with someone, they can just look back at things quite quickly because the new platforms are very good at that. So a lot of people are moving towards them. Second one is there is much stronger focus on employee development and empowerment. So performance management is a tool for employee development. It's not just about saying, did you do good enough? It's about development, really. So the language of your documentation needs to reflect that. It's also more about empowerment. It's about giving people more autonomy and control over their work. So it's about letting them set things for the agenda. It's about letting them review their own performance as well, instead of it just being you, the manager. It's about looking at continuous learning. If the whole organization believes that it's continuous learning, that it never stops, and people will get into that mindset. Another important movement is to align performance with organizational goals a lot more. Before, it was very much about a person's individual goals or maybe the team goals. But sometimes the team operated in total isolation from what the organization want, or people couldn't see where the goals of their team connected to the organization, which reduced engagement and buy-in from the staff member. So strategic alignment's really important. So you will see in your documentation some room for that really, and it's important to ensure that although the goals are refined and drilled down so that they are relevant to the staff member, they should reflect the strategic goals and objectives of the organization. Goals need to be clear, expectations need to be clear, not hazy, not just do better in this area, improve in this area. It's not good enough really. Goals need to be smart, uh, set, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. And they have to be recorded properly. Performance metrics. Nowadays, people tend to use key performance indicators to track progress, and these could be set for a whole team. Coming out of all the organizational goals as it steps down, there will be key performance indicators. All the organization might have some key performance indicators for different departments, and these will be tied into people's individual assessment. So it's all about keeping the narrative running through the organization. Okay, so the key elements of performance management are planning, monitoring, developing, rating, and rewarding. No matter what system you use, you'll probably use, I mean, they might have slightly different titles, but that's really what you'll be looking at. That's the process of planning, which is about defining the roles, responsibilities, monitoring, tracking the progress, developing, identifying the needs that you want to change, rating, evaluating the performance against whatever standards that you've got set, and rewarding, where you recognize and reward outstanding performance. Now, some organizations don't reward and some do. Some organizations will have bonuses and commissions and promotions and various things. If you work in the public sector company, you don't tend to get things like that, or a charity. But there might be some other ways of rewarding, or it might just be, just personal rewarding by, some feedback from your manager. We will be looking at all of these in a little bit more detail sort of later on. The other contemporary view is about looking at best practices in action. So they've gathered together what the contemporary view says are best practices that need to take place in performance management nowadays. And these are regular check-ins. So again, instead of the great annual review where nobody comes near you for a year, regular check-ins. Managers should schedule regular one-on-one meetings between managers and employees to discuss performance, development, progress. Another thing that's very recommended is 360-degree feedback. Some of you may have heard about it, and that's gathering feedback from multiple sources. So it could be the people below you, the people above you, and the people to the side of you. So the manager could sit down with you and you could choose a few people, and you would very often, they would have a feedback questionnaire to carry on, and then the manager would get all the information pulled together, or your supervisor. So it's quite nice that it's 360 because it's, like I said, it's above, below, and to the sides, so it goes all the way around. And some people find it a little bit daunting at the beginning, but it has actually proved to be quite valuable. Another best practice idea is strengths-based feedback. So you really focus on the positive aspects of someone's performance, and that's the sort of feedback that you give where people have done very, very well. And coming out of that, just, what do you want to develop to get that strength up to, to bring this aspect of your work up to the same level as that strength. Again, there are organizations that offer templates to do that. Open communication, again, is considered best practice, fostering a good culture of open and honest communication where people can be comfortable to share their ideas. So, again, if you keep it down to that once a year annual review, that's quite difficult if you haven't got that much communication going on between you and your supervisor. Data-driven decisions, using data and analytics to inform performance. So instead of saying, I saw you doing this and this, I don't think you did that very well, actually look at what people have achieved and use the data. So if you are needing to help improve someone's, say, customer service, it's like, well, let's use the customer service reviews to see where you stand in it. So use data. It makes it less ambiguous for both the supervisor and the employee. Okay, so I want you to take a little break now and do some guided study. I've given you some very well used performance management frameworks. I'd like you to do a bit of research on. You might want to, pick up some and use them as examples in your assignment. So we've got OKRs, objectives and key results, management by objectives, generally known as MBOs, the balanced scorecard, which is quite complex and technical, but quite useful as well. So it's good to at least get an idea of it, even if it's something you might not want to use as an example. And the 360-degree feedback, which I already told you about. But do a little bit of research on that and see where it's used and try to find out about their merits, really. Make yourself a few notes, pick out some quotes, don't forget to reference them properly. Before we move on to the next part, where we're going to look at the performance management cycle. Okay, the performance management process, or performance management cycle, as it can often be known, involves, as I sort of mentioned earlier, planning, monitoring, developing, rating, and rewarding. And this is to maximize people's values. It is considered on a cyclical basis, which is why it's often called the cycle, which is a defined period of time. So before we get into the process, whose role is it to do? Well, it's everybody's, really. It's a shared responsibility between people managers and HR. They actually hold responsibility for it. Although as an employee, you have a responsibility to, to work with them to actually carry out the performance management role and to do the things that have been set for you. The key roles are the managers or supervisors who link the organisational individual objectives and provide the employee with feedback and support, and the HR team who develop the practices and provide all the necessary tools and resources and the policies. Again, they will probably create the templates. They might sort of create, or they might engage a particular HR platform as a performance management platform. Depends on your organisation. The bigger organisations can afford the expensive electronic platforms. A small startup, you'll probably just have some paperwork, really. You might well do it electronically, but you won't be using big analytical. HR do, though, because they will actually have a look at the data overall, from teams to areas to locations to different departments, and they can produce data which wouldn't really be about the individual, but it will sort of show people's development and that as a whole, so they can talk to the board about it. Okay, well, this is the performance management cycle that I mentioned before. So just be aware of that. Planning, monitoring, reviewing, rewarding. And we're going to look at each one in a little bit more detail, really. So phase one is planning. And it's really just a foundation, and it's about setting the goals. So you have the organizational goals, which have been set by the board, and you take that forward through your team goals and then to the employee. So it's with the supervisor is setting employee goals, creating development plans, and reviewing the job descriptions. So you always have the job description available, generally within the file, so that when you're talking, people can refer to it when you're dealing with it. Organisational goal setting needs to be established for a period covering the performance management cycle, which is usually a year or a half year. So generally, the organisational goals will be set and reviewed in a year's time, and the team and employee goals will be, but it's possible that you as a supervisor might or manager might choose to review the team and employee goals more frequently than that. Definitely the employee goals, because we want a bit more of ongoing feedback. When we set the goals for the employees, as I've also mentioned, they need to be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and timely, smart. Use a SMART framework. If you're new to SMART, you can do a bit of research on that in your guided study time. There's quite a lot of frameworks that you can have a look at that explains it a bit more detail. But it really means that you're producing a goal that says, that's got a real focus to it, like this and this will be achieved by May the 29th, or 80% of your customer satisfactions will say good or higher by May the 29th. So it's very focused, rather than just saying we'd like you to improve in your customer satisfaction interactions. Once the goals are set, you create a personal development plan with the individual, two-way backwards and forwards discussion. You outline the skills and knowledge that you need to achieve their goals, and this is where your job description can come in handy. And you review the job description, and you make sure that the job description is still accurately reflecting the responsibilities. What happens over time, and a lot of people have said this, is when they've worked in a company, especially a startup or especially a new company that's developing, the jobs have changed over time, which is okay because it's changed, with good reason. But if you don't review the job description, then it really, people actually work into a job description that's not really of no relevance to that. That disengages them a little bit, because what are they working to really? So that keeping that reviewed and then going to HR and saying I need to change this job description, that really helps to clarify people's expectations and gives them a good framework. Okay, the second phase is monitoring, and this is where you're actively working towards your goals. And it involves regular check-ins. Regular check-ins, ideally it would be monthly, where you get together with the individual to look at progress and address any issues that are early. And the meeting should focus on, what people have accomplished, what they've achieved, and really let them know where they may have progressed over the last couple of months. Because sometimes when people are just busy doing their work, they don't always see it. So this is when the manager or supervisor gets a chance to say, you did that a lot better than you used to do it, and explain why. It also it enables the employee to identify if there's any roadblocks, what stops them doing it, and if anything needs to be changed and where they might need a little bit of support. And these effective check-ins, because they're sort of formalised, in a way. It sort of evolves micromanagement. So you're not standing on their shoulder every minute of the day, sort of watching what they're doing, because that's really hard for somebody. But you need to be sort of fairly inobtrusive, but just sort of prepare for it and say, okay, we're going to have a check-in, and you can talk to people about that. So you don't need to be directing them all the time. Another part of monitoring is to provide resources and support. You have to make sure they've got all the necessary resources to do what they can do, really. And this includes access to training or tools that they need to actually do their job, and any other support for their development. It's unfair of you to ask them to develop without providing the support that they need. Monitoring is also about identifying and addressing potential problems. Any early identification of potential problems allows for timely intervention, stops things going wrong, really. And managers need to be fairly proactive in addressing the issues that could hinder progress. And some businesses prefer to call this phase sort of acting or performing rather than just monitoring. They tend to might see it as like a separate phase, which is fine. And that's because it's essentially the period when people are actively working on their goals. So you may see it, some other layouts may show it as that. And during this phase of the performance cycle, employees are also actively taking on some kind of training, or they undergo other parts of the development process for that period. Okay, so the check-ins, when you're in your monitoring phase, obviously these check-ins are even more important. Do remember though, we're trying not to micromanage. It's not about sitting on someone's shoulder all the time. And it's not about saying, this is what you could have done better all the time. It's about checking in on everything that I've said here, really. Okay, the third phase is reviewing. So this is a comprehensive assessment. But this is where you might move a little bit closer to the old annual reviews that we used to have. You do need a review process. Now, some people may do it once or twice a year. They tend to keep it down to that limit because it is, it can be a bit time consuming. So some people might just do it once a year. Some people might do a 6 monthly and then an annual. And that really is a sort of a bigger evaluation rather than just looking at the nitty gritty that you do in your little feedback sessions. It's a sort of slightly more formalized evaluating of progress, and then some proper feedback. If you're going to assess someone's performance, you should always include some sort of self-assessment, really. You need to, they need to put their views in as well, and they can do that beforehand as well. You might prepare an assessment, ask them to bring their self-assessment, and any peer feedback and any other evaluations from other managers or other members of staff. If you're doing a 360, get that done beforehand. The feedback session should be sort of fairly constructive. They should focus on achievements and areas for improvement. They should try to balance it, really. Always start with achievements and then look at areas for improvement. And the discussion should be two-way. You can't really have a situation where the employee is just sitting there listening and you as a manager are telling you, right, there's this, and this, you did this good, you didn't do that so good, okay? So that's a real issue. And also the review should be very clear on what future development is and identify what new goals. So where they've done well, keep them learning, identify a new goal, identifying opportunities for growth, skill development, enlarging their skills, mentoring with somebody, looking at progression, those sorts of things. And then if there are certain areas you've identified for improvement, then very clear about what are we going to do about it. Don't leave it without you having had a discussion about what you're going to do about it. It needs to be forward looking, and that needs to keep people motivated. So as long as you do that and they've got something coming, right, okay, I'm going to set you, You're going to get you a training course on that one area that you feel is really bugging you. I'm going to find out about it and I'll come back to you in a month's time with what I've got, you know. Or I know of one, let me just check it out and then we'll come back and put it into the review. So don't just leave it as a, you know, floating on and on and on. They want something constructive. To be honest, if you know there's a development area before you meet with them, try to gather the resources beforehand, like maybe possible courses or, you know, a bit of shadowing that you might think would work, and then put that to them. So try to come with something, really. Okay, so those are the plannings. I didn't put a lot of detail on the rewarding because I said it's very different. That really relates to any organization. You know, some of them will have set rewards. Some of them you might just have an employee of the month thing. Some of them it could be just rewarding someone with praise, and you know uh, that's going to work really for whatever you do. So let's have a look at documentation. Your assignment asks you to identify what sort of documentation is required for each phrase. Now, most people will be using a template from your organization, so you will need to use the appropriate, most up to date template or electronic system if you have that. So, first of all, documentation, you need clear criteria. So again, hopefully a lot of that will be covered in the template. You also need a very clear agenda as well for what's going to be discussed. You should communicate the criteria to the employee in advance so they know what to expect and know how to prepare for the appraisal. So we're looking at maybe the end of year appraisal. The criteria, as we know, needs to be aligned with the organizational goals, values, and expectations. Also, the employee's job description. You need to have the job description handy when you're doing this sort of work so that if you do both want to discuss it, you've got something to refer to. You say, well, actually, I don't think my job description ever said that. So you can go and have a look at it. We've already talked a little bit about using multiple sources of feedback, such as 360 degrees, and you need to have that documented. So do not just bring in some feedback from somebody's peers that's just told to you verbally. Again, try to maybe have a template so that you've got spaces for different people's feedback. But it needs to be documented and preferably signed off by them or something you've sent to them, maybe on email, so that the staff member can actually see that it's been emailed back to you, print up the emails and add it to the back. Either way, have it clearly documented as coming from them, okay? And to do this 360 is really, really helpful. You can avoid some of the bias and inconsistency that people can have if you get lots of different views. Sometimes, as a manager, you might have your own biases that you're not even aware of. Third part of documentation is about being specific and constructive. So when you do document the performance appraisal, you will be writing up notes. It must be documented. You should be very specific and constructive. So don't be vague, don't be general, as I said. In the same way that we give people SMART goals, the feedback needs to be fairly smart as well. So don't give negative statements that have got no backup evidence to them. You know, if you saw something that didn't go, you need to say, on the 5th of May, I saw this, this, and this, and you know, you could have done this better. So where you can, it's a lot of work for the manager, and people must be prepared for it. Focus on the facts, behaviour, and outcomes that demonstrate. So it's about as factual as possible. And the suggestions and action plans need to be concrete and not vague either. So as I said, just don't say, oh, action plan, do this better, not good enough really. Again, your action plans need to be documented with timescales and required outcomes. And again, you can find lots of templates for this as well. Don't forget to highlight the employees' achievements and make sure they're written down as well. Don't only write the negative stuff, write the achievements first, and then look at, any other contributions, any other things where you're showing that they've progressed. All of that needs to be documented. Follow a consistent format. Make sure it's clear, organized, easy to understand, and it's consistent for each employee. If you're going to use a template, don't use a different one for every different person. You might find most organizations, it's top down using the same structures and templates. So you don't really have any choice. If you're a small organization or a startup, you might not put that in place yet. So as a manager, maybe, do something like that. Templates or tools that are created elsewhere can be very, very useful. Okay. But the most important thing is consistency. What you do for one person, do for another. Document it in the same way, with the same amount of care and the same amount of attention. Lastly, really, you need to store and share it securely. After you complete it, you need to share it securely. So you'll probably share it by email, or it might be, again, on a platform that people will have to log on to access. Or it might be something that's set up by your HR department if you're in a bigger organization. You should ensure your document complies with the organization's privacy and confidentiality policies for any other legal or ethical requirements. Remember, there's a data protection issue. If you don't know about the data protection legislation, do look up the GDPR legislation. It's quite important. We have covered it elsewhere in these in the courses. But make sure everything is secure, that only the people who need to see it can see it, and that's you, the supervisor. It could be your manager, that you could have a chain of command that are able to see it, and probably the HR department, but it should be limited. People maybe need passwords or whatever system, or like I said, if they've got an electronic platform, you'll probably just have specific logons for it, and it'll only be open for certain logons to get onto. Whatever you do, it can't go through a public sort of way. You can send things, if you're a small company, you probably just send things to people by email, but you need to password protect all your personnel information, which is on your own drive. Review and update the document regularly. You should review and update your performance appraisal regularly. And as we have decided, it's, although you have your 6 monthly and your annual, there should be sort of feedback sessions in between. You should monitor the employee's progress. So there will be action plans which will have review dates. They need to be completed. Comments need to be made. Feedback need to go in. Any new information that may affect the employee's performance evaluation. So if something happens and they suddenly get a promotion, you might have to review some of the things you might set out for them. If on the other case, they have a terrible accident and aren't at work for 3 months, then you might want to review, the stuff that you would have set them an action plan to achieve this and this by this time. Obviously, if they're not going to be back into work, they won't be achieving the action plan, but that needs to be clearly documented. So you do need to keep your document relevant and accurate, so that if you leave your job tomorrow and another manager comes in to pick it up, they are able to sort of follow on without going, what was that about? I don't know what that is. Okay. So really review and update the document regularly. And you might find that with regard to templates, your HR department is also reviewing it, and they might change the style of the templates that you use. But that's okay, because the next one you use will be the new template. But you should transfer over some of your action plans into a new template. So it does, just reminding managers the sort of work that they have to do, really. And people think, oh, they do this, this, and this. But actually, no, they do quite a lot of these sorts of things. Okay. So that's really it for week 4, performance management. I've got some guided study for you, and I'd really like you to do it. There's a little YouTube video I'd like you to look at. It's the secret to giving great feedback. It's quite nice, and it's a little TED talk, 5 minutes, I think. But it's certainly worth a watch, especially those of you who are thinking about that supervisory role. I'd like you to look through the research paper, The Future of Performance Management, in your resources. I'd like you to make some notes. And I'd like you to look for some appraisal templates that you can use as a guide, because you're going to have to do something like that for your assignment. So you can use some templates which you might find helpful. I think I've put one in resources, but there's loads of others. If you choose to Google them, just try to make sure they follow sort of fairly contemporary views. And if they don't, think what you would add to make them do so, really. So just, be aware of that contemporary need. Okay, that's it for week 4. That's the last teaching part for this unit. But before you do your assignment, I'm doing a little assignment tutorial for you, which will be loaded up into week 4 as well. And I'd like you to make a real point of listening and watching that, because it's really important. There's sort of added detail to go with the assignment template, which is quite large, that I just want you to be aware of. Otherwise, if you don't follow the instructions that I give you in the video, you won't be able to get the grades that you'd probably like. Okay, so again, I'll see you again for the assignment tutorial.